I am a substitute this morning for my intelligent, remarkable friend Carol Wheeler, whose mother died Friday. Carol is a passionate activist for women's rights, and I humbly carry that torch today. So justice, fairness. At the recent Women's March in Santa Ana, one of the signs that resonated actually with me the most stated, "I can't believe that we still need to do this." And another, "Not enough room to fit it all on one sign." And it is difficult to narrow down the injustices just for this morning, but as a young girl, my earliest moments of questioning justice were from reading the diary of Anne Frank. And decades later, we visited her Amsterdam hiding place and then Auschwitz-Birkenau. Yet along with all my rage, her quote about believing in the goodness of people remains a light within me. I was a grade schooler when I read a library book on the life of social reformer and social worker, pacifist, and feminist Jane Addams, founder of Hull House in Chicago. She inspired me to later study sociology and psychology. Addams was the first American woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And she wrote that action is the medium of expression for ethics. In the 60s, the civil rights movement was the first thing to really stir my outrage and activism. I marched in various protests, wrote letters to the editor, and once was asked if my foreign-sounding name meant I was a communist. It was said anonymously to me. No, I thought, you're asking me that makes you fill in the blank. Apparently, the Equal Rights Amendment appeared because civil rights didn't, of course, mean women or other disenfranchised human beings. It wasn't inclusive enough. But the Equal Rights Amendment never was ratified because, we still need to control the other in some way. Power and abuse, in myriad subtle and unsubtle ways, continue in some form everywhere. And sadly, this pertains not only to women's rights, but LGBTQ rights, race, religion, age, immigration. The list goes on. And yes, I joined the Me Too list from my workplace days. Regarding activism and justice, Gloria Steinem writes, "The road is messy in the way that real life is messy. It leads us out of denial and into reality, out of caution and into action." And I will add that the Women's March, for example, and the dynamic Tapestry's Women's Rights Group give us ways to use our outrage to work for justice for all women. It meets after today's service, by the way. This group, the Tapestry Women's Rights Group, formed last year and has a stellar list of accomplishments already. They have presented a play, a documentary, speakers, helped Planned Parenthood, Isaiah House, Wise Place, Friends of Orange County detainees, women in the military, the list goes on. I'd like to add one of my great interests is the abolishment of the unjust death penalty. Several years ago, I asked activist and actor Mike Farrell, he was Dr. Honeycutt in the TV series MASH, to speak at Tapestry. He has spoken twice here and representing Death Penalty Focus, which he founded years ago. To me, the most convincing, poignant argument against the death penalty was written by a mother whose 7-year-old daughter was kidnapped and murdered. She poignantly wrote, "There is no amount of retaliatory deaths that would compensate the value of my daughter's life. That kind of justice would only dehumanize and degrade us. The daughter was such a gift of joy and sweetness that to kill someone in her name would have been to violate and profane the goodness of her life." The idea is offensive and repulsive to me. She's a strong woman. I will close with an excerpt from a poem by May Sarton. When a woman feels alone, when the room is full of demons, the Nootka tribe tells us the old woman will be there. What is the saving word so deep in the past, from as deep as the ancient root of the redwood, from as deep as the primal bed of the ocean, from as deep as the woman's heart sprung open again through a hard birth or a hard death? I am open to you, primal spirit, one with rock and wave, one with survivors of flood and fire, who have rebuilt their homes 1,000,000 times, who have lost their children and born them again. The words I hear are strength, laughter, and endurance. Old woman, I meet you deep inside myself.
Hello everyone, I'm Paul Bonfanti, and I stand here as a cautionary tale to what happens if you have a spouse on the worship committee. You get asked to do things like this. So I've been asked to speak about my passion, which is nonprofits, and why I've chosen a career to support the work of nonprofits. And I think since the theme of the month is justice, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I was raised as a Christian, and I still identify as one. And one of the things that Christianity teaches us is that there is an all-powerful, loving God up there. And if you're a good Christian, you start to wonder at some point, well, if that's possible, why is there so much suffering? And why is there so much injustice in the world? Now, as an aside, if you're a bad Christian, you think, oh, it's because I've been chosen, I deserve everything I have. But I think I'm a good Christian, so I've been wrestling with that for my whole life. And I've never quite figured it out. But to personalize it, I wondered, why do I have so much? And I realized as a young man that the reason why I have so much is because I have a responsibility to share those gifts and to share my privilege with the people who don't have as much. So then the question is, how do I do that? First, I thought I was going to go into politics, but I realized that was way too much compromise for me. So I turned towards the nonprofit sector. And I realized very quickly that, in my opinion at least, nonprofits, whether they're secular or whether they're religious, are really the single best way to affect positive social change in the world. There's something that happens when you take the profit motive out of the equation and replace it with mission. People stop thinking about what's in it for me and working for other people. So I started working in the nonprofit field. I started out as a community organizer in the city of Philadelphia. And I was working with folks, and there was something really powerful about that, working with people who, low-income people, disenfranchised people, to work with them to find their voice and to find their power. And that was an incredibly fulfilling thing. I worked there for about 6 years. Fast forward a little bit, Nikki and I got married, and I decided to go back to grad school to get my master's degree to be a more effective leader. My graduation from Villanova University coincided with the birth of our wonderful twins, Nadia and Sophia, and also was in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. That was a really scary time to have no job and be the father of twins. So I took a job at Villanova. I thought it was going to be a short-term thing. I thought I was going to be back out on the streets pretty soon, but the job was very comfortable, and it was very easy, and it was very well-paying. So I stayed, and I stayed for 6 years. I was kind of trapped. And I didn't realize how disappointed in myself I was and how depressed I was, because universities are great places, but that university, or at least my role in that university, I wasn't doing anything to address inequity. I wasn't doing anything to address injustice. So I was unhappy. And then we moved to California for my wife's job. And that was the exit strategy I needed. And I was very fortunate to find a job working for a wonderful company called the Olin Group, which is weird because it's actually a for-profit company I work for now. But it supports nonprofits, and as I tell people, tell new employees, we're really bad at the for-profit part. Because time and time again, I watch our owners and our leaders, the Olins, make decisions that are really bad for the bottom line, but because it helps people or it fills a need and the nonprofit can't support us, they do it. And what resonates with me is they couch it in language like it's our ministry or it's our calling to do that. So now I'm in a job where I feel like I'm making a difference again. And I'm amazed what a change that makes for me. For me personally, but also I'm getting to work on issues like immigration policy, child abuse prevention, domestic violence, homelessness, access to health care, and a lot more. And I've gotten a crash course in Orange County. And I needed that as an East Coaster, because if you're not from Orange County, you have this view of Orange County that everybody is rich, beautiful, and thin. And we know that's not necessarily the case. There is so much need in Orange County. And because I'm a stat guy, I'll throw out a couple stats. Now, probably a lot of you already know all of this, but there are 260,000 undocumented immigrants in Orange County. And they live every day in fear of deportation. There are about at least 4,800 homeless people in Orange County, and more than half of them are living on the streets. About 20% of our youth are living in poverty. 20% in a county with so much wealth. And because of all of these contributing factors, you take a place like Santa Ana, 2/3 of the third graders in Santa Ana are not meeting the literacy and the math standards for third grade. A place like Irvine, 20%. That's the inequity, that's the inequality that we deal with in Orange County. And I hesitate, that last statistic I hesitate to say because it's easy to say Orange County has a poverty problem. Yeah, but it's all Santa Ana, it's all in Anaheim. That's not true. And I think you guys know that, but there are pockets of poverty, there's tremendous need everywhere. San Juan Capistrano, Lake Forest, even in Laguna Beach. And that's why I think it's so important for all of us to think about that injustice, not get blind to it, and to think about how we can address that. I know one of the things that we treasure about this congregation is that it's a congregation that knows that. And I personally am so glad that I found a way, found a career and a job where I can do at least a little bit to share my privilege with the people of Orange County. And again, I thank you for being a congregation where I can stand up here comfortably and talk about that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Salahy. Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, recently finished up a fact-finding mission in the US. He visited places like Georgia, Alabama, and West Virginia, but he also stopped here in California. His report described the conditions facing the 1 in 8 Americans who live in poverty: rotting teeth, crushing debt, homelessness, hunger, drug addiction, untreated illness, and pollution. Alston concluded, statistically speaking, a child born into poverty has almost no chance of getting out of poverty in today's United States. Alston's look at poverty reflects the effects of policies that have been in place in recent years. Then, last month, the federal government passed a tax bill designed to further redistribute income upward. The economist Thomas Piketty recently said the tax plan will, quote, turbocharge inequality in America. And we're already starting with a high level of inequality. You've probably heard the numbers. The wealthiest 1% in the US possess 40% of the nation's wealth. The bottom 80% own just 7%. I believe that governmental policies affecting economic fortunes are directly related to questions of justice and fairness. Turbocharging an already high level of inequality will exacerbate the injustice that many Americans are suffering. So this afternoon, I'm going to look at justice from the perspective of what constitutes a just society from an economic point of view. Now, there's no such thing as a society where all are equal, and in fact, as a society where all have equal wealth, and in fact, some amount of inequality is probably a good thing in terms of providing motivation. But when inequality reaches the levels we see today, it leads to inequality of opportunity, and that makes our society overall poorer. I've given some brief statistics to support my contention that today's division of wealth is unfair. Here's a more concrete example. In recent years, some hedge fund managers have made as much as $4 billion annually. This is enough for one person to pay the salaries of every public school teacher in New York City. Is it really the best thing for our society to encourage hedge fund managers to sit atop mountains of gold, while the less privileged go without health care or proper nutrition? We have to keep in mind that each society defines the rights that its people will have, both the natural, inalienable rights as well as the further legal rights a society may choose to confer upon its citizens. As we enter into the social contract, we need to strive for a system in which all can prosper. And to be sure, even the super rich depend on a well-ordered society to help them build and maintain their assets. Roads, airports, banks, courts, public schools, and an educated workforce are all required to provide the infrastructure that allows companies to create their products and services. A just society will want to define a system of rights that makes everyone better off. The American moral and political philosopher John Rawls proposed a thought experiment intended to help clarify a way to do this. Rawls argued that an attempt by even well-intentioned people to define a fair system of laws and policies was likely to be influenced by personal biases. Since we all have unavoidable biases, Rawls proposed that we imagine what a group of people who have no such biases might do. He suggested that a way to approach the problem would be to imagine a group of people creating a system of governance before the society actually comes into being. These people making decisions about how to fairly structure the social order would be working from behind what he called the veil of ignorance, in which people do not know what gender, race, abilities, tastes, wealth, or position in society they will have. Rawls argues that ignorance of these facts about one's future self will lead each person to embrace principles that are fair to all. If an individual does not know how she'll end up in the incipient society, she's going to want a system that will be reasonably fair, even if she turns out to be poor and a member of a minority, for example. Proceeding from this original position, Rawls arrives at two principles. One, each person is to have as much liberty as is compatible with liberty for all. And two, any inequalities built into the system are to be arranged so that they are to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. So some people will still be smarter or better looking or more talented in some way, and wealth will still be distributed unevenly, but overall, society will be more fair and there will be less suffering. And this, to me, is an important part of what might constitute a just society. Unfortunately, UN Rapporteur Alston also said of the recently passed tax bill, the tax reform package stakes out America's bid to become the most unequal society in the world. It would behoove us to remember that historically, when inequality became too great, societies became ripe for cataclysmic change, like the changes in France in 1789, or in Russia in 1917, or in the colonies in 1776.